They built canoes so light, one man could lift them, yet so strong they carried whole families across wild rivers. How did the Iroquois master this balance, centuries before modern engineering? For the Iroquois people, known also as the Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse, rivers were more than just water. They were the highways of life, connecting distant villages, carrying trade, and weaving together the fabric of an entire civilization. Long before paved roads and steel bridges, the Iroquois carved their own path upon water. Their canoes were not just tools of survival. They were symbols of ingenuity, the quiet genius of a people who knew the land, the trees, and the flow of every current. This story dives deep into how they crafted these remarkable vessels, light enough to carry across portages, strong enough to cross turbulent lakes, and graceful enough to glide like shadows through the morning mist. Imagine a land thick with forests, endless stands of birch, cedar, and elm stretching toward the horizon. Rivers like the Mohawk and the St. Lawrence cut through these green worlds, carrying fish, beavers, and travelers alike. The Iroquois homeland, nestled in what is now upstate New York and southern Canada, demanded versatility. Unlike the vast open plains, here, waterways twisted through forests and hills. To travel them, one needed a canoe that could move easily through narrow channels, but also endure the rough chop of a lake. The landscape dictated design, and the Iroquois listened. They didn't just live in nature, they engineered in harmony with it. The Iroquois were masters of natural engineering. Every element of their canoe came directly from the forest, selected not for appearance, but for purpose. The framework, the bones of the canoe, was made from white cedar or spruce. These woods were light yet resilient, able to flex without breaking. For the outer skin, they used elm bark, a material that could be peeled in large sheets and naturally resisted water when properly treated. Unlike the famous birch bark canoes of the Algonquin to the north, the Iroquois preferred elm. It was tougher, heavier, but more available in their region. And when built correctly, an elm bark canoe could last for years, enduring the punishment of rocky shores and heavy cargo. To make the bark watertight, they sealed the seams with pine resin and animal fat. The interior ribs were bent into perfect curves by steaming them over hot stones, a process that required a craftsman's intuition. Too much heat and the wood cracked. Too little and it refused to bend. When finished, the canoe had an elegant symmetry, narrow ends that cut the water cleanly, a flat bottom for stability, and sides that rose just high enough to deflect the waves. It was beauty through function. No wasted detail. No ornament beyond necessity. Building a canoe was more than a task. It was a ceremony of connection between man, tree, and river. It began in early spring, when the bark could be peeled from the trees without tearing. The builders would walk deep into the forest, feeling the trees, listening to the sound of the wind through their branches. Choosing a tree was a spiritual decision. The right bark meant a safe journey. Once the tree was selected, it was felled carefully and the bark removed in a single sheet. This was no easy feat. The craftsman had to cut just deep enough to free the bark without damaging its fibers. The bark was then soaked in water to soften it and make it pliable. Next came the frame. Long cedar poles were split, shaped, and bound together with strips of spruce root. No nails, no metal. Only the strength of nature's fibers and the skill of human hands. The ribs were steamed and bent into a gentle arc, forming the canoe's graceful profile. Each rib was lashed securely in place, forming a perfect balance between rigidity and flexibility, a hallmark of Iroquois design. Finally, the bark was wrapped around the frame and stitched together at the seams. The joints were sealed with hot pitch, applied carefully by hand. The builders often sang as they worked, their songs carrying through the forest, not just to pass time, but to honor the spirit of the materials. By the time it was finished, the canoe had become more than wood and bark. It was alive, a vessel with a soul, built to carry people and stories across generations. When the time came to test the canoe, the builders carried it to the river. The Iroquois were proud of how light their craft was. A single man could lift it easily onto his shoulders and walk miles between rivers. The moment the canoe touched the water, it floated effortlessly, its curved belly hugging the current. The builders would step in, one after another, and push off into the flow. The first glide was always silent, reverent, a moment of communion between creation and purpose. They would test it by crossing eddies, paddling upstream, and rocking it from side to side. The canoe moved with the grace of a leaf, stable, yet free. When it passed every test, a small fire was lit on shore, a sign of gratitude to the river for accepting their work. The canoe soon became an extension of everyday life. It carried hunters across still lakes at dawn, traders along winding rivers, and families to distant villages for council gatherings. Each trip required skill. The Iroquois paddled in rhythm, using strokes that wasted no energy. Their paddles were broad and carved from a single piece of maple or ash, polished smooth by hand. Traveling by canoe, one could move hundreds of miles in silence, gliding between pine forests and mist-covered waters. They transported furs, corn, and carved tools, trade goods that bound the Iroquois Confederacy together. Children learned to paddle before they could run far. Women sometimes used smaller canoes to fish in shallow waters or gather wild rice along riverbanks. Every member of the community depended on these vessels, and every generation learned how to build and repair them. So what made these canoes last so long, even under the harshest conditions? The secret lay in their design philosophy: flexibility over force. Instead of resisting nature, the Iroquois canoes worked with it. When waves hit, the thin bark sides flexed slightly, absorbing the energy. When the sun baked them dry, the bark shrank and tightened, naturally waterproofing itself. Every repair was done with the same care as the original build. A torn bark panel was replaced, seams resealed, and the canoe rebalanced. Nothing was wasted. Old bark might become roofing for a shelter or kindling for the fire that sealed the next canoe. In this way, canoe building was a cycle of creation, use, decay, and renewal, mirroring the natural rhythms of the world the Iroquois lived in. The canoe wasn't just a vessel, it was a teacher. It embodied the Haudenosaunee worldview, harmony with nature, respect for materials, and balance in all things. In Iroquois stories, the rivers were living spirits. To travel them was to enter a dialogue with the world. The canoe represented trust, trust in craftsmanship, in the river's rhythm, and in one's companions. Elders told stories of ancestors who paddled beyond the known lands, discovering new waters and bringing back wisdom. These tales were not myths of conquest, but of connection. Each journey reaffirming that man and nature were part of the same current. Even today, among Iroquois descendants, the canoe remains a symbol of unity between people, between nations, and between the past and the present. Modern engineers often marvel at the sophistication hidden within these ancient crafts. Their design, balancing strength, lightness, and stability, reflects principles now taught in boat-building schools around the world. But beyond the physical design, the Iroquois canoe carries a deeper lesson: innovation born from intimacy with nature. The builders didn't measure success by speed or luxury, but by harmony. How well their creation fit into the world it moved through. In an age of plastic and carbon fiber, their work still whispers a timeless truth: that real progress isn't always about invention. Sometimes it's about remembering. From bark and cedar, the Iroquois shaped vessels that carried generations across rivers and time itself. If their story inspired you, don't let it drift away. Subscribe to Native American Origins and keep the legacy of ingenuity, spirit, and connection alive.